Women evolved to feel entitled.
Okay, the 11th episode of Bad Philosophy with Rocking Mystery. I've decided that I'm just going to do 12 instead of 13 because the last one I was going to was on his views on capitalism, where he basically blames all the problems with capitalism onto the state apparatus, some of which he is kind of not completely off because, of course, crony capitalism is a problem we have in the U.S. and a lot of other countries have. But the idea that completely unregulated capitalism would be problematic as a basis for society is probably not something that I feel I need to spend 30 minutes arguing about. And his entire arguments are denialist arguments. So I'm just going to skip that and just do these last two on women and rights. So now we're going to see what he has to say about women, and as you can probably tell from the little opener, he's not terribly enlightened.
Leftists often denigrate men for violence and an oppressive nature. Of course, they always present their information in a vacuum, and men are every bit as capable of noble and good qualities as women.
Okay, straw man alert. We have a society that basically encourages men to be more aggressive, and it used to be that men were taught to solve problems with their fists. It's changed a lot. There's still some men who feel that way, but it's how men are taught. It's not like the men are naturally that way. But Rocky Mystery is a biological determinist, and because he believes there's no such thing as any other kind of factor that could affect you other than biological determinism, even though he does say that there are some cultural constructs in some of his videos, but you never hear him give an example of one. What is a cultural construct that you actually acknowledge, Rocky Mystery? Because he never says one. So if people talk about men being violent, which they are disproportionately violent, and specifically violent toward women, and we say it's a cultural thing, then he has to say it's a biological thing because that's what he believes.
But while men are innately programmed to feel the need to protect and provide for women, women are also innately programmed to feel entitled to be protected and provided for.
Okay, this is a pretty audacious claim. You would need a lot of evidence to support this claim that you're biologically innately programmed to be a provider if you're male, and biologically programmed to be provided for if you're female. You would need a lot of evidence to support such a claim. Also, the irony that Rocky Mystery is a stay-at-home dad. Once again, I feel like it's an easy target to mention this over and over again, but it's just such an obvious contradiction to his thesis. Like you put forward these claims and then don't live even remotely by them.
Before I go on, I want to state to those that constantly repeat the "not all women or men are like that" fallacy that in this video I am concerned about general tendencies, not exceptions.
Alright, once again, you would have to find a way to prove it's biological, not cultural. Now, exceptions, he calls that a fallacy. Like saying that not all women are like this and not all men are like this is a fallacy, but it's completely valid to say that. You can argue based on general tendencies, I suppose, but general tendencies tend to be like cultural, would be my argument. Like, there's definitely a difference between, say, like African American culture in the United States and Latino culture in the United States. There are differences between those cultures, but they're not like biologically ingrained. You'd have to be stupid to think that. So to make this broad generalization, it's like the burden of proof falls on him. He has to make the claim. Since he's making the claim, he has to provide the evidence for the claim.
Women are natural communicators thanks to female brain skills. Female brains are also very good at multitasking and highly tuned to empathy. Female brains evolved so that their eyesight allows them to have strong peripheral vision, meaning they could spot predators from the side more easily.
Okay. He probably has some links somewhere. I'm going to go look at his links. Okay, the link he has is to an autism site. about autism. It says nothing about male or female brains. At one point it might have, because they have a list of recent publications, but perhaps Rocky Mystery is too stupid to realize that if they have a list of recent publications, that will change over time. So perhaps when he put the video on, there was one up there. I will go ahead and say this. There are differences between male and female brains, and we have no idea what they mean. Like, we have not been able to give any scientific evidence that these differences are evolutionary, that they are the cause of different behavior in men and women. In fact, they used to say that like left brain, right brain thing about men and women for like years and years and years. And a recent study found that to be false. There was some evidence to believe it, and now new research tells us it's false. So it's not impossible that there would be major differences between male and female brains that we just don't know about yet. But also, there's absolutely no evidence to back up the kind of claims he's making. This is evo-psych pseudoscience bullshit.
Male brains are very good at focused vision. This makes men naturally strong at hitting targets, which is a result of their evolution as hunters. It's no coincidence that men spend hours watching and playing sports or shooting things in computer games. Men are drawn towards such activities because their brains evolved to be highly efficient in visual spatial skills. Male and female brain variations translate into men excelling in areas like physics or flying planes, while women excel in empathy and communication, two examples being teaching and language.
Alright, once again, nothing to back this shit up. It's interesting that, let's say like a field that does involve language, involves empathy. Many of those fields are closed off to women historically too. He says teaching. Teaching for a long time was like the only career that was highly open to women. Teaching children. Because it was just thought that women are better with children. They can teach children better. If you wanted a job as a woman, like being a teacher was kind of like the job that would be most open to you, that's like a real career for a long time. So once again, this is just him doing a biological explanation for gender stereotypes.
All these skills come from our ancient lineage. While men were off hunting, women would use their peripheral vision to detect predators and their communication skills and empathy to collectively look after children and one another. Men were always expected to protect women and to hunt for meat, risking their lives for the benefit of women and children. For far longer than the tiny fraction of time that makes up human civilization, this setting helped humanity to dominate the animal kingdom.
Alright, since he provides absolutely no evidence for this on his video, I decided to do a little Googling and look around, and I found that his claim about men having better like straight-on vision and women have better peripheral vision is actually true from research. But also like women have a better sense of smell, which makes absolutely no sense based on the things that he's getting from it. They also have a better sense of taste. In fact, like a lot of things that women seem to be like more sensitive to taste and smell, which I can't think of like how that would be an advantage in like the way he's framing it, or a disadvantage either. Though my girlfriend always seems to smell things that I can't smell, so I don't know.
When human civilization came about, women were still expected to fulfill their roles as gatherers and nurturers, while men were still expected to provide and protect. But then something happened around 100 years ago. The world had changed dramatically, and women felt safe enough to leave the side of the male protector, gradually realizing that the state could protect them instead. At first this was slow, and most women simply wanted individual liberty equal to men. But then the 60s arrived and the West yearned for a new society. This was where it all started going wrong. Feminism began to transform from a movement based on individual liberty to one based on left-wing female entitlement.
Now, once again, I can refute this claim that he's making with a simple observation. He's a stay-at-home dad. What the fuck's he complaining about? He's a stay-at-home dad. Is he saying that that he is staying at home is wrong? Is he saying that he is actually going against his biological determined role? Is he saying that it's the state that does this? In which case, since he's anti-state, why does he do it? Is he saying that women working is wrong? That's hypocritical. Is he saying... What the fuck is he saying?
Gradually, the ruling class, such as politicians and the corporate elite, realised that feminism could work in their favour. The government in the US, for example, began to immediately grow significantly in size as soon as women gained the right to vote at the turn of the 20th century. This coincided with an increase in revenue through taxation, spurred on by social programs for women, and clearly shows that the state benefited greatly from women's suffrage. If we look at the 2008 US election, unmarried women voted for Obama at a margin of 70 to 29%. For House candidates, unmarried women voted for the Democrats at a margin of 64 to 29%.
Now there's one simple reason for this. It's abortion. Unmarried women care more about having the right to an abortion. Married women, while they may want an abortion at some point, like that issue becomes, once you become married, that issue becomes less of an issue to you personally because you now have a partner who is your permanent partner. If you get pregnant, you're more likely to want to keep the child. This also happens when women get older. They tend to get more conservative. Men get more conservative as they get older too. We know this from this trend. It must be biological because Rocky Mystery says all this stuff is biological. My mother became pro-life when about the time she hit menopause. Been pro-choice her entire life, and she never had an abortion. Started having children at a young age. Decided to keep a child that she had as a teenager. But had always been pro-choice regardless. But when she hit menopause, suddenly she became pro-life. Totally makes no sense whatsoever. She is like kind of religious, but not a fanatic because she supports gay marriage and things like that. But just suddenly she became trying to figure out some kind of conspiracy or some kind of like direct causal relation between people's political ideologies in this way, the way he's doing, like saying that people who are more liberal are people who rely on the state. No, people who are more liberal tend to be more educated. And in a lot of cases, like in Obama's case, he's never going to mention when Obama was elected the first time, he was voted in by one of the demographics he won were people making over $250,000 a year. He won that demographic, even though he said he was going to raise the taxes on those people. So that's a refutation of his idea that it's the people who are benefiting from the state or feeding off the state who are voting Democrats in. That's complete and utter bullshit because there are other factors. There's not a single factor. While it's not like it's like 0 single women vote Republican. It's not like 0 married women vote Democrat. It's but the abortion issue is probably a big factor, as well as some of the other horrible things that Republicans say about working women.
Overall, 56% of women voted for Obama over McCain. All this information, of which I will leave links below, tells us that women statistically vote for bigger government. So those who refuse to acknowledge that modern women turn to the state as a substitute father or husband really do need to open their eyes.
Why did Obama win the majority of people with postgraduate degrees? Why did Obama win the majority of people making over $250,000 a year? Answer that question, Rocky Mystery, and then we'll talk about how other people need to open their eyes.
Why does this happen? Well, as I've shown, women evolved to expect to be looked after. Hypergamy is one example of this. Women traditionally married up in the social ladder, taking a husband who is from a better financial background to her. In return, the woman bears the man children and is a nurturer. But just because women don't turn to men as much in our modern society, it doesn't mean that women have stopped expecting to be cared for.
Yes, it fucking does. The whole point of feminism is that women don't have to be treated like property anymore. Recently, I was reading Jane Austen, which I never really cared for Jane Austen. I was reading Emma. Previously, I read Pride and Prejudice when I was a teenager and liked Pride and Prejudice. But every time I tried to read another Jane Austen novel, I've hated it. And the thing I hate about it is she brings up the fact that women are like kind of treated like property. Kind of satirizes it a little bit, because these women, like, they need to get married. It's all about these women like finding a husband, because if they don't find, not only if they don't find a husband, but they need to find the right husband, then their options in life are very limited. Like, they can't do anything without a husband. But Jane Austen tends to like bring this stuff up, or like it's front and center in her work, but yet she's kind of like, oh, this kind of sucks for women, huh? But what are you going to do about it? But she is writing in the early 19th century, but it's just so... she accepts the conformity. She, like, even Pride and Prejudice, which of the four I've read so far is the one I like the best, she satirizes that courtship rituals of her society, and then at the same time reinforces them in the end. Like, it's very odd to me that Jane Austen is considered just such a great English author, though like her books are witty and well structured, with sometimes with very interesting characters. But the fact that she's just so accepting of this kind of thing kind of bothers me. It amazes me that like so many modern women read Jane Austen and still love her. But like that's really how women are treated, and he wants to go back to that. He hasn't demonstrated shit. Like, his links don't demonstrate shit. There's nothing scientific about anything he's demonstrated so far.
At the same time, men still feel the innate desire to look after women, and many men with influence exercise this yearning, like judges and politicians. This phenomenon is known as gynocentrism, and despite what leftists and feminists will try to tell you, most men go out of their way to make women happy. So it doesn't take a lot for a disingenuous group to exploit this, given that women expect to be protected and provided for, and men are programmed to give women what they need. When the state saw the opportunity to grow and feminists saw the chance to gain more power for women, the two forces came together to demonize men as the complete opposite of their truly compassionate nature towards women.
Alright, this is just a conspiracy theory. It's just a fucking conspiracy theory. There's a theory about how... This is like a theory about how we actually live in a matriarchy. Because the state is feminine. The state is a giant vagina that is going to envelop us all. That's what it is. It's... like a lot of science fiction writers have tried to imagine what a matriarchal society, and a lot of literary writers have too, would actually look like, and it's actually rather difficult because a lot of times they just reverse the gender roles, like the traditional gender roles, but that's inaccurate because our gender roles are cultural. It like never works when you do that. It like always feels kind of false, and it's not because like men and women are biologically that way. It's that it's hard to say that if you lived in a matriarchal society, how the gender roles would have developed. So I've seen a lot of writers try to do it, and every writer ends up with a different idea. Because it's hard to imagine what the world would really be like if women were given the kind of privilege that men are given. And the fact that it's so hard to even imagine that just shows you how much bullshit this is, because they are saying that we live in this. We live in this place. I don't see any evidence of women giving privilege at all. I see some evidence of kind of, I don't even want to give them any credit, like kind of like women being seen as something that needs to be protected. But that's because of patriarchy. It's not because like women have special privilege. This is the thing that the MRAs always do for like the argument for why women need or get special privilege is like women are treated like they're delicate, and like the thing is, like if a woman pisses me off on YouTube, I go after her just as hard as I go after a man on YouTube. There's just a lot more fucking insane men saying crazy things on YouTube than women saying crazy things. Like, the only woman on YouTube I can think of that kind of pisses me off on a regular basis is Jacqueline Glenn, and her trolls who have come to the times that the 2 times I've addressed her in a video have been the meanest. But that's just because the anti-theists tend to be the meanest. Meaner than the MRAs. Anti-theists tend to be meaner than any other people when they come to your videos and call you an idiot. Like, the MRAs just are kind of like nonsensical court jesters, but anti-theists tend to be worse. I'm totally getting off track. I'm going to go to gender studies next as a subject.
Gender, yet another social construct.
Rockin' Mr. E, yet another philosopher.
I've been accused of simplifying postmodernism of late, though no matter how much I clarify that this is an all-encompassing philosophy that deconstructs a whole series of subjects, it's blocked out by the ideologues already sucked into the vortex of leftist dogma.
Now, in all honesty, don't know a lot about postmodernism. In fact, if I go back to the relativism video, which is the very first episode of the series, I think, like, when I was talking about postmodernism, because I know so little bit about it, I wonder if I was even characterizing it wrong, because I think I may have been giving Rocky Mr. E too much credit, because as I understand it, postmodernists are just analyzing the structures that we use and asking if they are legitimate structures. Sometimes doing that even with the hard sciences, which is why Rocky Mr. E finds them so threatening. The only postmodernists I really know a lot about are Derrida, which I mentioned before, but also Foucault, who I read Foucault and didn't know that he was considered a postmodernist, which shows you how little I know about postmodernism, because I can read a whole book by a postmodernist and not realize I was reading one by a postmodernist. Postmodern philosophy is not really something that I know a lot about. But I do know that Rocking Mr. E is all the way on the other end. He's basically a logical positivist, if that's even too charitable, because I don't want to associate him with guys like Frege and Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein. But that's what he is, though he's one like 100 years too late.
As with much leftist philosophy, there's a strong French influence that comes across in the origins of gender studies. People like Simone de Beauvoir historically made claims based around one becoming a woman as opposed to being born one. This formed the basis of the critical and literary theory that sets out gender studies in academic institutes. With the expansion into areas like queer theory, a relatively recent brand of gender studies relating to homosexuality, gender being defined as a social construct has become a dominant theme for courses all over the Western world. Another example being women's studies.
Okay, I cut a huge chunk out because he calls postmodernism trash, he references Orwell and calls it Marxism and says that its goal is social simulation, which he should put, in my opinion, social simulation, since that is not its actual goal. But he'll be happy to badmouth postmodernism as much as possible. And then he talks about Simone de Beauvoir, who he slanders by calling her French. But an existentialist, her and Sartre are the only philosophers who are labeled existentialists who actually call themselves existentialists, because there really is no such thing as existentialist philosophy, because it's a name that the media gave to a bunch of philosophers who have similar viewpoints on things. But a lot of philosophers who are considered like the pre-existentialist philosophers are Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, and Schopenhauer, and they're not existentialists because they don't fit into that definition of existentialism. But if you take a class on existentialism, they'll probably start with those three guys, or at least Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. And all of the ones who were called existentialists, they denied the label. Heidegger was a big influence on the existentialists, so he's sometimes called an existentialist, but he wasn't. He's a phenomenologist. So, not an existentialist either. Also not postmodernists. Existentialists are kind of continental philosophy, which kind of comes out of Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and began with existentialism, and now postmodernism is kind of the dominant method of continental philosophy, is more similar to sociology and psychology, whereas analytic philosophy is more similar to like your natural sciences, your supposed hard sciences, or mathematics. Also interested in language. I have more of a background in analytic philosophy, so I know much more about analytic philosophy than continental philosophy, but unlike a lot of analytic philosophers who just dislike continental philosophy outright, I do have influence from certain continental philosophers and consider it valid. Like, he's going to say it's not valid at all. You won't actually find that a completely like unpopular opinion among certain philosophical circles. Like, certain analytical philosophers or analytical philosopher groups will have nothing but disdain for continental philosophers. But he's going to have to like show you how what they say is invalid, which I don't think he's up to it.
I could spend the duration of this video making logical counter-arguments.
Oh wait, he wasn't joking. I'm sorry.
To disprove gender studies philosophy. But the truth is that the world has moved on dramatically in the last 20 years. So much of the conjecture of gender as a social construct has unraveled itself. Science has been able to repeatedly empirically prove that male and female brains are very different.
Okay, the brain thing. I went to his links again. He has a link from How Stuff Works. Once again, this is an extremely controversial topic in the sciences. For him to like be reading things from this research, which scientists are debating very fervently, he would probably say the scientists who don't take it the way he does are brainwashed or have a political bias. But yeah, like the idea of like bigger brains on men is one of them. Men do have bigger brains, and even the How Stuff Works article shows bias to me, because it says scientists have had us believe that the reason men have bigger brains is because of the bigger body mass overall. But even accounting for that, men still have bigger brains. So like even the beginning of it just kind of seems shady to me by saying that, because here's the thing. My girlfriend's a scientist. She works with the brain. She is trying to cure Alzheimer's. That's what her research is in. She works with the brain. She is very skeptical about these MRI research, and reading like Sam Harris's work and stuff like that. She finds it like very bad science, particularly him, not other MRI neuroscientific research. But she also said like having a bigger brain doesn't make you smarter. Does having a bigger computer make it better? Like, computers haven't gotten bigger, they've gotten smaller. So a smaller brain could be a more efficient brain, therefore a smarter brain. So when you look at these differences between men and women's brains, they tell you absolutely nothing about, first of all, why they are like that, and two, what that means.
When a zygote is formed in the womb, it's initially asexual or genderless, and it isn't until the 10th week that the fetus starts developing in this regard. It's during this period that scientists now know to be pivotal in the development of a human being. The hormones administered to a fetus directly affects the character of all of us for the duration of our whole lives. Androgens or estrogens flood the fetus, and depending on the amount it's exposed to, will dictate the nature of the growing human being. A male given a lot of androgens in the womb will develop masculine skills like athleticism, logic, or spatial ability. A woman exposed to a lot of estrogens will develop feminine traits like maternal instinct, communication, or peripheral vision.
Okay, this is a really horrible oversimplification. But I love how he, like a lot of these guys do, give logic to men. Men are just super logical, except for all the female mathematicians and logicians and computer programmers and Like, a lot of times on the internet, like, these fucking MRA trolls will talk about the internet, and they'll talk about how... Because a lot of these guys, I think, work in tech fields. And I think so. A lot of these guys are, like, code monkeys, and they work in male-dominated fields. That's why they're so sexist. Or they're sexist because there aren't a lot of women around, or they chose to work in those fields because they're sexist. One or the other. But a lot of these guys are, and they seem totally ignorant, like how many women contributed to these things, to the internet, to computer programming, like the history of women. And the thing is, we don't teach the history of women. A lot of times, just like we don't teach the history of African Americans. There's a book in psychology about the history of psychology, just African Americans in psychology, because they're cut out of most textbooks and things like that. Like, they're not mentioned. Like all these great African Americans in just that field of psychology. And there's a book called Even the Rat Was White, is what the book is called, which is just about the history of African Americans in psychology, and it makes you realize how much they were cut out. Their contributions are cut out. Women's contributions are cut out all the time in our culture. This is supposedly in academia, that left-wing crazy conspiracy theory that's supposed to promote female superiority and left-wing values. From academia, they cut them all out of the textbooks. It's been a complaint for a long time that women are constantly cut out of textbooks. Don't tell it to Rocket Mystery. He won't understand.
Before we start running into the gender-neutral camp of androgyny, let's take a step back and reflect. What makes leftist philosophy so wrong is the constant angle of a socially constructed world, repeatedly exposed as a tactic to cause division in society for the benefit of political upheaval. These theories will most likely eventually eat themselves, given that the scientific method is far more reliable. But what's very important is that people realize that men and women are very different for biological reasons, not some patriarchy conspiracy. The idea that evil men were what shaped the gender roles of the past is primarily fraudulent, and the only way that feminists and other leftists can insist on this is by citing male oppression.
Alright, I'm just going to end right here, because this is already like really long for an episode of Bad Philosophy with Rocket Mystery. But let me just tell you, it's a false dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy to say gender is either completely a social construct or completely biological. It's a false dichotomy. It's somewhere in the middle of that. If you want to argue about the where in the middle, but I think it's absolutely insane. In gender studies, though, that's debated. It's actually debated in gender studies. I've never taken a gender studies class in my life. But since I've come on YouTube and argued with these anti-feminists, one of their slurs at me is to like say that I'm a gender studies major, or like I took gender studies classes or whatever, because that would be the worst thing in the world to take a gender studies class. It would be the worst thing in the world to educate yourself on a subject. But as far as I know from the research I've done since having this in gender studies, yeah, there are a lot of academics in gender studies who have a very similar view to the one I have. There are ones that even think it's more biological than I. They think it's like 50-50 almost. And there are academics who think it's completely a social construct. But I think they're in the minority, though I have heard that before. I've heard feminists say gender is completely a social construct before, and I have seen there's a gender studies professor on YouTube, and she is teaching. She's showing a class. She uploaded her class on YouTube, and she literally frames it like that it's either or, and it's a false dichotomy. So there are I think you're wrong if you if you think it's completely a social construct. Though I think the idea that it's completely biological is probably even more insane, because I think gender has to be at least somewhere around 70% a social construct. Just from evidence in the hard sciences and social sciences, and combining those together, and just looking at it philosophically, it seems to me to be somewhere around 70-80% a social construct. And I would be open to a debate with somebody, but I wouldn't debate with somebody like Rocking Mr. E. And I definitely probably wouldn't debate with somebody who thinks it's completely a social construct either, because I think that is equally as insane. Like, how can you even back that up? Because, yeah, your biology does affect you. But, you know, just being, like, born a person of a certain height affects your personality. Being born a person who is conventionally good-looking affects your personality. Like, things like that will affect your personality. But it's the cultural effects that influence you. So yeah, I don't understand how you can oversimplify it the way Rocking Mr. E does, but he is really stupid. I mean, if this series has proven anything, it's that he is really, really, really stupid. So there could be a very interesting debate over how much of gender is biological and how much of it is cultural. Though we delineate gender and sex, which don't mean the same thing. But we delineate those two terms, and just how much of your gender is just based on what sex you're born, and how much of it is based on the societal norms based on what sex you're born, is a debate you can have. So I'm just going to end it right there because I'm rambling.